That looks fun. There, that looks better.
Hey, we thank you for listening to the very best in modern praise and worship. Tony Hammock here in the studio with Brandon Gay and Charlie Fuquay. And we're really excited to be here with you, and glad that you're listening, glad you're a part of the program today. And I just wanted to welcome everybody. And we've got Brandon here, and Brandon is an interesting fella. He's got lots of information, lots of knowledge, and I'm excited to hear his opinion on our subjects that we discussed today here in the studio. And I guess I want to start us off, if you guys don't care, with today being September 11th. You know, the anniversary of the terrorist attacks, Islamic fundamentalism struck at our door. And I wanted to, remember to pray for the families that have lost loved ones, and keep mindful of those things. And you see a lot of stuff on Facebook. I'm a Facebook person, and you see a lot of stuff on Facebook. Never forget and all that. And it seems like sometimes we have a tendency to forget, and I don't really want us to do that.
How long has it been since the Benghazi attack? Is this 2 years now?
Yeah, 2012.
Okay. So it's 2 years since that. The Muslim terrorists love anniversaries, and they like to celebrate them. So, we just hope we make it through this day without any celebration on their part.
Yeah, right.
I know Brandon is here to talk mainly about the takeover of Southside by Batesville, but before we go there, I just have to say some things about what was said on television last night.
Can I interrupt you? And I want to go there too with you, but I want to say this. I'm really getting tired of talking about Islam every Thursday, but it keeps coming up, and it's an issue that is life-threatening for people. I mean, this is serious. This is really serious. So, again, I'm growing weary of this subject, but unfortunately, it's probably just beginning. And these things, especially if we don't want to define things accurately, we can't clearly articulate the enemy as a nation, it's going to make things tougher and tougher. But Charlie, go ahead.
I couldn't agree more. I wish we didn't have to talk about Islam.
Yeah.
But it's what's going on right now.
Yeah.
And I've got to read a quote from President Obama in his speech last night. No religion condones the killing of innocent people. And I want to say that's true for Islam. Islam does not condone the killing of innocent people. There are many people in this world that are guilty of not submitting to Islam. And therefore, they're guilty and they deserve to die. Yeah. That's what Islam teaches.
Right.
All non-Muslims must be killed.
Right.
Okay? That's what Muhammad taught. That's what Muhammad did. That's what Islam has taught and done for 1,400 years. What we need to understand is you don't get good fruit from a bad tree. And the tree of Islam, the branches are evil, the trunk is evil, and the root is evil. Muhammad gathered together a group of evil men that went into peaceful villages, butchered the men, and then used the women and little girls for sexual pleasure, stole all the booty, and then sold the women and children as slaves to buy horses and weapons so they could go pillage another village. And that was the life of Muhammad. Now, Islam teaches that to live a life like the life of Muhammad is the highest good.
It's important to understand that lots of religions throughout history have damaged the innocent.
Yeah.
They have done things against the innocent. And really what we heard last night within that statement was to say that we're not truly recognizing any religion that would harm innocent people, but to do that's to stick your head in the sand, and I'm afraid that overall is a theme that we've seen with this administration that we have over and over. Let's stick our head in the sand and not pay attention to what's going on.
Another consideration is the religion of secular humanism, which is probably one of the predominant ideologies in the United States of America, which has brought to us the killing of millions of innocent babies through abortion. Through the religion of it's all about me, it's all about my life, it's all about my conveniences. What do I get out of life? President Obama was on record saying he didn't want to have his daughters punished with a baby. So if babies are punishment under the ideology of secular humanism, which is really, I hate to say this, but I would say secular humanism is the religion of America.
It is. You're right.
It's pervasive from the cradle to the grave.
It's taught in the public schools.
It's taught in our schools. It's the ideology of America. You are good. You're a good person. You don't have a depraved, sinful nature. Don't think of that. But what it's brought us is self-centeredness, selfishness. It's all about me, what I want, what I can get. And if a baby gets in the way, it's okay to kill him. And that is the death of innocent life. And it happens right under our noses every day, right here in the good old US of A.
Sure.
I got to say one other thing. Rand Paul also spoke on the television last night.
My expectations were higher.
Oh, yes, mine were far higher than what I heard. He said, we need civilized Islam to step up. And he named as civilized Islam Saudi Arabia. Now, Saudi Arabia employs beheaders. They're employees of the government. And if you leave Islam, they cut off your head. It's a government action. Also, if you're a thief, they cut off your right hand and your left foot. I would suggest to you that it's hard to rehabilitate a person to earn an honest living when he has his right hand and his left foot cut off. That's not civilized.
Here's to me the issue with the statements that the president made and what you're talking about Rand Paul defining, moderate Muslims or what they call moderate Muslims or civilized Muslims, I think was the term that he used. Abu Mukhtar al-Baghdadi, if that's how you say his name, is the leader of was called ISIS, then became ISIL, now it became IS. And whatever you want to call that organization. And names matter, by the way, but people know what I'm talking about. That man got a bachelor's degree in Islamic studies at a university outside of Baghdad in the suburbs. Then, because he was so interested in Islam, he went further in his education, got a master's degree in Islamic studies. Then he went further and got a doctorate degree in Islamic studies. So the leader of ISIS doesn't know anything about Islam. That's like ridiculous. The guy knows his Islam. He knows his stuff. He's got a doctorate degree in Islamic studies. And the president of the United States, who says he's a Christian, sat under Jeremiah Wright, was educated in Jakarta, India, in an Islamic madras. We don't
Indonesia, not India.
Yeah, Indonesia. What's he know about Islam compared to al-Baghdadi? The guy knows his Islamic theology, or whatever you call it, Islamic ideology.
It's always important to remember that there's always this dichotomy that takes place. We don't have perfect writings as men, and are there peaceful things in the Quran? Yes. Are there violent things in the Quran? Yes. And it all depends on when the writing was taking place, and so a lot of it depends on where the Muslim wants to read and where they want to spend their time doing this. Right. If they want to find things that are incredibly violent, you absolutely can find it. But what happens, many Muslims across the world choose to only focus on the things that are less violent. That doesn't take away from it. The violent is still there.
Right.
And so if there's plenty of violence there, because what do we find? We find that our adversaries today, that's where they tend to go directly hardcore into that, and it makes it incredibly dangerous. If we take the spiritual aspect of it and just look at practicality, anytime I have someone that reads a book that they put their ideology toward and that book drives them into extreme violence, it's dangerous to me. It's dangerous to us as a society. So just being very pragmatic, that's where we find ourselves, in a very dangerous situation, because we have a large group of the world that's where they have cast their lot into this violence.
Right. Well, you could say the same thing in some ways about the Bible. I've been reading through the Old Testament, and
sure,
there are judgments that God pours out, and God instructs the people of God to pour out on other nations to commit genocide. To wipe out civilizations. But again, I think it comes back to the doctrine of, abrogation. where
Absolutely.
the Old Testament doctrines and teachings have been, in some ways, abrogated by the doctrine and teaching of Jesus Christ. Where Jesus Christ came in and said, you've heard that it was said, hate your enemies, but I'm telling you to love your enemies, pray for those that persecute you and despitefully use you. Well, in Islam, it's almost the opposite. And again, for our listeners, they already know, probably by listening to me, I'm no Islamic expert. I'm no expert on Islam. But it would seem that Muhammad came along and began to teach as the new teacher, the latest revelation, the hot off the presses. This is the information from their ideology, from their perception of what God is. This trumps everything else. So
everything else has been abrogated.
Yeah, everything else gets swept under the rug. And what's the latest and the hottest teaching from their prophet? It's Muhammad. And what did he do? Well, how many of you know, you guys know when you do something, it speaks a whole lot louder than you talk. And so his life and doctrine both agreed with this teaching that we see in the Middle East. Now, Charlie, we've talked off the air about how there's a couple things that are different. Like you said, that Muhammad never would have just killed innocent children. He would have used them for sex slaves and then sold them into slavery and profited from those kids. He wouldn't have just beheaded them.
That's correct.
That was indiscriminate killing.
He was smarter than that.
Yeah, he wouldn't have just killed those children. He'd have made money off of them.
Yeah.
But I think, too, in Brandon, you kind of started to touch on something I wanted to get into, too, is this idea of moderate Muslims. I think that there are Muslim people out there, obviously, that don't have a stomach or don't want to go down this pathway.
Sure.
And I'm glad.
Well, now, and let me say this, too. If you live in a Muslim-governed country, you have to say, I'm a Muslim. You have to go to the mosque, or they will kill you.
Yeah.
Okay? You can't, if once you're a Muslim, you are an apostate if you leave Islam. And Islamic law says you are to be beheaded. And they do it. So I believe there are maybe the vast majority of people in Muslim countries that would love nothing better than to be rid of Islam. But they have no power to do that.
And I have to believe that just as we all know in Christianity that many, many people, maybe the majority even, of Christians are nominal Christians. Right? They're not truly walking with Jesus Christ.
They're not on fire.
Sure, they're not. And I have to believe that the majority of Muslims are the same way in the world. That they're nominal in what they're doing, and they pull out some good. It becomes a social thing.
I would go even further than that. I believe the majority of people living in Muslim countries hate Islam. I really believe that, but they have no power. They can't do anything about it.
Well, here's the thing. Right now, you hear this phrase, kicking the can down the road. We're redefining what Islam is for Muslim people. And we're telling, and Bush and Tony Blair did the same thing. They said Islam's been hijacked. And I'd love to believe that. I want to believe that. But as I've looked at the subject, I really think Islam has been more hijacked by moderates than by what we would call extremists. Because when I think of an extremist, I think of someone that's taken something and they've perverted it and they've made it into something it was never intended to be. They're extreme. They've changed the original intent. But when you really look at the doctrine and teaching of Muhammad, they're not extremists. They're fundamentalists. They have taken what he has said and what he has done, and they said, we want to do exactly what he did. We want to say exactly what he said. We want to live the way he's told us to live, and that's exactly what we're going to do.
There's Christian extremists. They are so extreme, as they're being tortured to death, they are praying for the people torturing them.
Yeah, Hebrews talks about people who refuse to be released. They were in prison, they were captured, they refused to be released so they could receive a better resurrection.
A Christian...
That is extreme, but it's true.
A Christian extremist is somebody who tries to live a life just like Christ.
Yeah.
A Muslim extremist, or fundamentalist, whatever you want to say, is somebody that wants to live a life just like Muhammad.
Well, the foundation of the thing determines everything.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's right.
And the foundation that we have is based on God's love of reconciliation, that he's loved us. Beyond all reason, we believe that God has loved us. And you don't find that within Islamic teachings. They don't have a God that's based in love. It's a God that's somewhat removed. And
Slavery, service.
and so we're starting at a very different foundation. So when you have a fundamentalist Christian, a true fundamentalist Christian is what? He's someone who loves to the nth degree. And when you find a fundamentalist Muslim, who are they? They're someone who hates to the nth degree.
Absolutely.
Because you're starting with a totally different foundation in that.
And that brings up the point I want to get to, which is what no one wants to say and no one wants to deal with because it's immense. The problem is not extremist Muslims. The problem is people that correctly interpret the Quran and put those things into practice. So to me, the problem becomes the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad.
Absolutely.
That is the real problem. Now, why don't we want to say that? We don't want to say that because the ramifications for that are immense. That means now our quote-unquote allies have now become our enemies.
Absolutely.
But let me tell our listeners something that's a fact. They may not be our enemy today, but they will be our enemy tomorrow. And if you kick that can down the road, that can is going to come back to bite you in the hiney. And it's not going to be pretty for our children. And I'm concerned about that. I'm very concerned about that because of one component is Islamic birth rates. You look at the birth rates of Muslims worldwide, and man, I mean, I don't mean to be crass, but they're popping out kids left and right. I mean, 10 to 12 kids per Islamic woman.
And man can have 4 wives.
That's right. So, I mean, the fact that, we're dealing with quote-unquote extremists.
And let me say this, in all the Western European nations and the United States have systems set up that if you have 4 wives and everyone's having 12 kids, they're all supported on the government dole. So that it's profitable for them.
Yeah. So, like I said, I think the issue for me, and no one wants to say it, because if you say it, and let's say you're Barack Obama and you stand up in front of the nation and the world, and you say, we have a battle against fundamentalistic Islamic ideology. He wants to redefine what Islam is for the Muslim world. And maybe the Muslim world listens to him and goes, oh, you mean my imam's got it wrong and Barack Obama's got it right? Oh, well, thank you. Thank you, President Obama, for sharing that. I'll straighten up my Islamic theology or whatever it's called. And I'd be hopeful that would happen, but I'm not an idiot. I don't think that happens.
Well, you've got to throw out the Quran and all holy Islamic literature. You've got to throw it out and say it's all false. Islam cannot be reformed. It just can't because it's rotten at the root.
And that's what I think Brandon's getting to, is that their ideology and their whatever, I don't even like to say the word theology talking about Islam, but their thoughts and ideas are rooted in slavery, servitude, works, hatred, death, murder, polygamy, the list goes on and on.
Theft.
Yeah, theft, I don't know,
all the wickedness of the heart of man.
Yeah, right. It is.
I mean,
no,
right?
not pulling any punches
Right.
about it either. It's not only just like, oh, this is bad, but don't do it, but it's encouraged.
Well, think about where most of the recruits from American society into Islam are coming. They're coming from prisons.
Yeah.
Now, you take a man that's in prison for, rape, murder, and theft, okay? And you go to him and you say, hey, you like to commit rape, murder, and theft, don't you? Oh, yeah, I love it. Well, if you become a Muslim, you can do all that in the name of Allah, and you get to go to paradise forever.
Yeah, it's twisted.
The thing, there are certain sins that we have that it's not necessarily formed in righteousness that we see within Islam, but there are certain things that they're against that we see and we would say they are very much against, that are sins. Understand that in the world at the time of the forming of Islam, this was considered to be obscene. Off stage is the word obscene in Greek. And those are the things that we see. A secular person that believed in no God would have believed these things to be wrong at the time of the forming of it. So we have to be careful and not think of Islam as this bastion of righteousness. Anything that we see, like they're against the homosexuality and some of the lifestyle things that they have that they're against. that's very much a product of the day in which Islam was formed at that time. It's not because there's this righteousness that is inherent within it.
Yeah.
They're just conforming to that.
As a matter of fact, Muhammad said, "The spoils of war have been made lawful for me, yet it was not lawful for anyone before me." You know, we tend to think that Islam, how can I put this, was not barbaric in the 6th century. Islam was barbaric in the 6th century. Even in the 6th century, most people were too civilized, they saw good and evil. And even in the 6th century, Islam was barbaric.
Well, I want to touch on that. When the Christians have got a really bad rap through the years for crusades.
Yeah.
First thing to remember is there were a number of crusades. The first crusade was an Islamic crusade, throwing the Christians out of the Middle East. And then the Pope comes in and says, well, we're not going to have that. And he goes back in and he casts the Muslims out. The Muslims, 120 years later, say, we'll have no part of that, and they come cast the Christians. And this goes on and on and on. All the crusades were barbaric. But for some reason, I don't see this stickiness of the Muslim being so barbaric sticking as the Christians have had it stuck to them as being so barbaric.
Yeah.
This was a battle that happens at that time, and you know, when you think about Saladin, how many people died in the Crusades at that time under him, it was absolutely amazing what had happened. They've been barbaric all the way from the very beginning.
Because that's the root of it.
Sure.
You know, you got to understand that the land that the Muslims conquered, most of it was Christian land before Islam existed.
The Middle East was nearly completely Christian at the time that of Muhammad.
Mm-hmm.
And
especially North Africa.
Oh yeah. We think about Augustine. People think about Saint Augustine, the great saint that so much of our doctrine is built off of within Christianity. He was the Bishop of Hippo
in North Africa.
In North Africa, we think about modern day Libya, I believe.
Mm-hmm. Well, we got our hands full.
We do.
And our children are going to have to deal with this.
Yeah. And we need to wake up. You know, it's not radical Islam. It's fundamental Islam. It's
a much purer form of Islam.
Right. More accurate to the original.
Sure.
Yeah.
You know. Well, you guys ready to shift gears?
Yeah, I think we need to. Brandon didn't come here to talk about Islam. Brandon came here to talk about the takeover of Southside by Batesville. What do you have to say about that, Brandon?
You know, we've got two communities here in Independence County that honestly they've lived very well together. Everybody's been relatively happy, right? But I can speak to the folks at Southside. When I say Southside, I'm speaking south of the White River in general. There's several communities out there. They have felt for 40 years, honestly, and it's because 1967 was the first attempt at an annexation that takes place, that they have felt for 40 years that Batesville was actually trying to come and forcefully take over an area south of the river. And there's been this kind of animosity since then that has been in place. And here we have the latest attempt by Batesville coming to do that. The problem is right now that Batesville, in their defense, feels a little bit against the wall. They've got to pay some bills that they don't have the money to pay, and they've got to find a way to pay it. And so they're coming very hard right now. That being said, the folks south of the river do not want to be part of Batesville specifically. There's been some misstatements about how the area south of the river was formed, and it was natural growth of Batesville, and that's what's being claimed. The history just does not bear that out. The fact is that the areas south of the river formed along with Batesville forming all at the same time, and were inhabited just as long as Batesville's been inhabited. I think my family moved here in 1822 from Coosa, Alabama, and settled over there. I mean, and they weren't the first ones here. Right? They were settling those areas before then. And as a matter of fact, Batesville owes a lot of its population growth to, as industrialization takes place more and more, people from those areas move into Batesville to get closer to industrialized jobs. So Batesville's growth actually comes from areas around, rather than Batesville's growth moving out, populating those areas so much. So, all that being said, what we feel like out there is, let's say I had my neighbors down the street. In the middle of the night, they get together and they decide how they're going to take my house over. And they come to me the next day and they say, we've decided we're going to take your house over. And I said, I don't want you to do that. And they said, don't worry, we're going to vote on it, but you get a vote too.
Yeah.
Right?
That's fair.
Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
Well, but the fact is, the very fact that my neighbors would meet and talk about taking my house over, even if they decided not to, the very fact of them meeting and talking about it is hostile. Who are they to even meet and talk about such things? That ought to be unthinkable for us to talk about such things today. And that's really where we're at. But the leadership in Batesville, not the people in Batesville, the people in Batesville generally have been very supportive of us. They have not wanted this annexation to take place. They've been very supportive. Matter of fact,
You're talking about the people,
the people
not
in
the
Batesville.
city council.
The leadership in Batesville in general have shown this hostility in coming out there and not really caring what the people thought. Matter of fact, you could see that in the city council meeting that took place where we had over 1,000 people from Southside show up to the city council meeting, and the city's leaders seemed to not care in the least. They were going to do what they wanted to do no matter what. That's how the leadership has acted. The people in Batesville have been very supportive. As a matter of fact, I mean, we have several hundred that have reached out to us and let us know. We're absolutely supporting you, and we think this is wrong.
Can I tell you something? An elderly man, and I'm 65. Okay. Man, a good bit older and probably wiser than me in church, who lives in Batesville. Okay. He was getting out of his car at church the other day, and he said, you know, this whole Southside Batesville thing, we're criticizing Vladimir Putin for taking over another country. This is worse than what he's doing. And I wound up writing a blog on that after that. But it's true. I mean, it's a hostile takeover.
Well, you know what's an interesting thing? In the hearing that took place back in 2006 on this, in front of the judge, there was a hearing that took place on what we were able to do to incorporate out there at that time. And anyway, I think this was the 2006 hearing. Anyway, Donnie Bryant is in attendance at this hearing. He had been on the council, and he was talking about, in the hearing, about going any farther. And he said, you know, when we went to the foot of the hill and extended the city limits in that strip to the foot of Ramsey Mountain, he said, we promised the people of Southside that we would not go up the hill and we would never go any farther. And he said, I think we need to honor our word. And that's what he said in that hearing. And he said, we promised them we wouldn't.
This is in 06, you think?
Yeah. And he said, we need to honor our word and not go any farther. And here we are. The problem is that there are some that have seen us as a stopgap, has seen us nearly as a piggy bank, that if we have this project and we find out it can't be paid for, we have the ability to go up there, capture the extra tax dollars in case we need it. And that's what's happened. The power to tax is the power to destroy. What we see here is that the tax has been raised so high here in Batesville that tax receipts have not gone up. You reach this point of unity. If we look at this Laffer curve that takes place, you reach this point of unity where all of a sudden, if I tax more, my tax receipts go down.
Revenue drops.
And what's happened, they have gone past that point of unity, and tax receipts actually for the county have gone down a little bit. For the city, they've gone down a little bit. And even though the tax has gone up, when people are making big purchases, when they're buying a hamburger, they're coming to Batesville, it's no big deal. But when they're buying a couch, they're buying a television, they're buying a refrigerator, even if it costs them a little bit more to go out of town, mentally, they're not paying that 10% sales tax, and they're heading on out of town to go buy that. And it cuts down on the revenue.
I want to tell you something. A few weeks after this new tax went into effect in Batesville, I happened to run across the manager of the supermarket at Newark, and he told me, "Man, our sales are up. They're really up."
Business is booming.
and what I find that when my wife and I are out of town, we think, well, what can we buy out of town so that we can avoid that Batesville sales tax?
Sure.
Even groceries, anything. We seek opportunities to shop outside of Batesville to avoid the tax.
I ran into a guy last week. That's kind of what he was talking about, and he said, if the city of Batesville thinks I'm going to give them more than I give God, they're out of their mind. And
Maybe you should give God a little more.
That's right. That's right.
That's a preacher.
That's right. That's right. But that's kind of where they're at. I'm from a business standpoint. I'm in business, and I look around, and we've been told that the park and all this stuff is going to bring in more businesses. The problem is before any business looks at a brochure, before they look at any information, before they go to a website, they compile a spreadsheet that shows every place that they would consider going. And when they're looking at all those possibilities on the spreadsheet, it's got all these metrics that show the different things that they're going to look at.
Right.
And they look on there and go, "Oh, that's nice. Batesville's got a water park. That's nice over here. My God, look at that sales tax." They want me to pay for it. I think we need to move on because it speaks to the mentality of the people that says that they're willing to tax themselves to that degree in order to have this amenity. And it speaks to the regulation, it speaks to all that, and the area kind of has shot themselves in the foot with that. And I hate to say that, but people in Batesville are welcome to do what they want. Today, my problem is that as a people that are south of the river, that the vast majority disagree with having such a facility, who had no vote in it at all. As a matter of fact, it was talked about bringing that in the county, and it was the county did not get a say on it, and now they want us to pay for it. I find that repugnant, and I find it offensive.
I want to say something. In the meeting that was held at UACCB, Mayor Ellenbaugh said that the county used to contribute to the budget for the athletic facilities in Batesville, but they no longer do that. And as I thought about that, I thought, wait a minute. If you live in the county, but shop in Batesville, you are contributing.
Sure.
So his statement was not truthful.
Sure. I'm going to say this. The people south of the river enjoy a different type of lifestyle than they do in the city. And it's not a big difference, except the difference is a mentality. We enjoy a level of freedom out there. If we want to build a fence, we build a fence and we don't think about it. We want to have a building, we put a building up, we don't think about it. And here's my, I was telling one of the leaders at Batesville over last week, I told him, I said, here's the fact. If you approved every single permit that came before you, every one, and you gave every permit away for free, the very fact that I have to come before you and ask for permission is offensive to me. Because the fact is, we are men born free, and it goes against everything that we say that we believe as a country. Right? And that's the problem. We don't particularly build unsafe houses today at Southside, right? You don't see them falling down around people. We don't have more fires than they do in other places. But you know what? We live in a freer state than they do inside the city limits, and we'd like to keep it that way.
Yeah. I mean, when I think about these kinds of things, I always think about the Boston Tea Party, and the taxation without representation, which is not exactly a perfect analogy of what's going on, but it's very, very close. And that was, like you said, repugnant. That infuriated the revolutionaries, and they said, "Hey, we're not doing this." You're not taxing us and not having, we don't get a say. You know, forget that.
By the way, that tax was 1/2 of 1% on tea. It was unthinkable.
Yeah.
This 1/2 of 1% on tea was unthinkable.
Yeah.
You know, I want to say something else about, you know, this whole recreational center. If you look around the country, there are municipalities, cities going bankrupt all over the country. And by and large, it's because they took on projects, ice hockey arenas, whatever, that they couldn't afford.
I want to mention something about that because, I'm an athletic person. I'm doing triathlons. I love to run and bike and swim. And my kids are very athletic. I've got young children that will use a facility like this. And so in some ways, I think it's kind of cool. You know, but then let me tell you a little bit about my experience. Because I swim and I made some trips over to Heber Springs to go to their aquatic center, which, by the way, is a phenomenal setup. Man, it is nice. I mean, it's clean, it's sharp, the water's great. Everything was just beautiful, very well kept, very clean. And when I went to swim during the day, it was empty.
You mean you were the only one there?
Me and maybe one other person, a couple of staff kind of floating around. Now they've got a weight room. I didn't go over there. You know, they got some other stuff over there, and that place may have been packed. But that aquatic center was empty. I mean, I felt like a king in my own little palace over there swimming. You know, I'm like, man, this is great. But you can't, you know, how do you justify that expense when it's empty? Now I know I wasn't there 24 hours a day. I know they've got swim teams that go over there and use that and different things. But my point is this: when you look at the population demographics of Independence County and Batesville compared to Heber Springs, I'm going to just speak in generalities for a minute. I would say that the population demographics of Heber Springs probably is a little more white collar, probably a little more money involved over there, people who are maybe more retired, want to get closer to the lake. They've got a whole different demographic than what we have here in Batesville. And if you think about a daytime swimmer, you know, people that have jobs are not going to be over there swimming during the day. They're not going to be there. But who is going to be there?
Retired people.
Somebody who's 67, 68, you know, they want to do some moving around in the pool, you know. That place should be packed with people in Heber Springs, and it's not. So my prediction, I'm going to go out on a limb here. Our aquatic center, I think, when it opens, I think it's going to be jammed. I think everybody and their brother's going to go, hey, let's go out there. Let's check that thing out. Let's go swim. Let's go float around the lazy river. Now, I've paid money to go to lazy rivers before. And when you first get in that thing, it's kind of neat, you know. And you float around in circles about 100 times, and then you're ready to get out of there.
And you don't care to go back, do you?
Well, and you think, well, I did that, you know.
Yeah.
It's not one of those things that keeps drawing you back and drawing you back. And for the record, I love activity. I love this stuff. I think it's great. But if it's such a wonderful idea, why couldn't someone with a little capital form a group and say, hey, let's build this with private money and let's make some money, because this thing is going to be so frequented. This thing is going to be so used. It's going to be so profitable. We'll all make an excellent living with this facility. And that didn't happen. No, but you would think that the private, you know, if it's such a wonderful idea, the free market would birth this thing with. You know, look at the Family Fun Center. I mean, that place is jammed. That place is doing great. It's fun, you know, and the kids like to go there. And as far as I can tell, the people that own that place are doing well. So why couldn't we have the free market build us a water park, you know?
And part of the problem is scale. If I came home tonight and I told my wife, I just signed a contract to build a $2 million home.
Oh, yeah.
Okay? And now, would the home be nice? Sure. The home's absolutely nice. But when I get home and I go, oh my goodness, what have I just done? I've signed a contract to build a $2 million home. My first thought should not be, I need to go take my neighbor's stuff to pay for it.
That's right.
Okay?
It shouldn't be that way.
That's the problem. And that's really where they're at. It's a matter of scale. Could the city do something in order to have activity and things? Sure. But we're talking about the sheer size in dollar amount of this project is immense. It's the size that you would expect to see out of a town that was 4 to 5 times the size that Batesville is. not the size of it. If let's say that Bethesda had decided to build the same project, right?
Yeah.
Where do we take this? It's just far too large a project for what's going on because it didn't have the money for it. And for me, I'm a guy that's really conservative in my finances, and I go and I look at this. I say, economy's bad, sales are down, things aren't doing well. I don't look at my wife and say, let's increase the entertainment budget. Right? We're gonna go do some other things besides increasing the entertainment budget. If we're trying to do something to actually boost the area up, that probably was not the best use of the funds that could be used in that.
Let me ask you this, because I really believe this is coming. This is a financial disaster for the city of Batesville.
Absolutely.
I mean, it could bankrupt this city.
It could.
As a matter of fact, I would say that's probably the most predictable outcome. Does anybody have any thoughts about what could be done? Because the bonds have been sold, the construction started. Even Mayor Ellenbaugh at this time realizes this was a horrible mistake.
I hope so.
Surely
I hope
he realizes that. Okay? Do you know, can anything be done at this time to scale this thing back to a more affordable level?
They're so committed at this point. If they stop the project today, in my estimation, by the time they pay the bond insurance and take care of the things that need to be done, plus what they've already spent, they're at about $5 million. Whether if they stop, and there would be no benefit to it at this point.
You mean just shut down the
If
project?
they just shut it down and pay all the expenses on the bond that they have, because there are certain expenses they have in bond expenses that have to be met whether they take the bond all the way through or not. They're in about $5 million from what I can see, my estimation. Scaling it back, what do you do then? They've already done the groundwork. They've already pulled everything in. They would really have to start at ground zero and go back to the bond issuers again, because part of what stood for the guarantee on the bond was the property itself. So now they're going to have to go back and redo the guarantee on the bond. So that's unthinkable. Honestly, I think they already are working their contingency plan. They're already working Plan B. And
That's
Plan
to
B,
take over Southside.
go and increase their tax base. They've already moved into the contingency plan right now.
But now, I believe, and you correct me if I'm wrong in this, I believe that the vote the city council took to move forward with this was an unlawful vote.
That's correct.
And so even if the people of Batesville vote to do this, and I think there's, I know of a lot of people in Batesville that say this is immoral, we're not going to vote for this. But even if the people in Batesville vote to basically rape the people in Southside, I don't believe it'll stand a legal challenge.
It won't. Here's the problem. Arkansas corporate law of 1982 winds out all votes that take place by corporate bodies, whether it's a private corporation, public corporation, town, whatever. The actual electorate within it, which is the board, in this case the city council, there are certain rules that they can do. And the executive of any corporate body, which would be the mayor in this point, cannot vote unless certain triggers take place. The trigger that the 82 law says is that the electorate must have a tie. Once that a tie is reached, the executive may vote. If he votes, he can only vote in the affirmative. He can't vote against. He gets to choose whether to vote or not, but he cannot vote. The trigger for him to vote does not take place unless a tie is in place. And there was no tie that night. Matter of fact, it was kind of comical. As the mayor is trying to vote, the software would not let him vote. It's compliance software. And he's trying to vote, and the compliance software says no, and it wouldn't register his vote, and it wouldn't register, and he tried over and over and over, and finally he says, put me down as a yes, I'm a yes. And it's comical to watch this, because him voting at all actually negated the entire vote.
Now let's be clear, they needed a 2/3 majority.
Yes.
And there's 8 members on the city council?
Yes.
Okay? 1 wasn't present, so that counts as a no.
It was a no.
And then Doug Matthews, one of the city councilmen, voted no.
Yes, and then there was one more voted no.
Oh, was there one
Yeah,
more?
there were two present that voted no, plus Fred Crew registered as a no. And so they didn't have what they needed to meet the majority.
So it wasn't a tie, was it?
They never reached a tie
Yeah.
in order to trigger the mayor's vote at all. And that ends up becoming the issue. So the vote itself, that was illegal. They also did not meet, this emergency thing is very interesting. The city seems to enjoy having emergencies. Never let an emergency.
Ron Emanuel.
Yeah.
Never let a catastrophe go to waste.
Yeah, the city actually had an emergency to replace the light bulbs over the park. As a matter of fact, it seems that every time the city makes a purchase that would require a competitive bid, they have an emergency because they don't have to have a competitive bid. It seems like every time that they do anything of any size, there's an emergency. Now, they can't tell what the emergency is. And what the emergency does, the emergency suspends rules, so now they don't have to be a competitive bid, they don't have to have 3 readings, they can do things immediately, even big things immediately. But apparently over the last 10 years they've had hundreds of emergencies. And as a matter of fact, I can tell you just from a practicality standpoint, any place that is managed in such a way that they have so many emergencies, they have bad systems, and I really don't want them governing it, just from practicality. If you're having so many emergencies, maybe you need to get that worked out before you come and decide if you want to take over my life, because I can tell you my life doesn't have that many emergencies. I mean, that's just as a practicality.
So you're just talking about the city government uses these emergency loopholes to do what they want.
Yes, and they're really not loopholes because once they're called on it, they can be called on it and challenged. What is the emergency? And in court, they have to state what the emergency actually was.
Well, now, shouldn't they then get that emergency on record when they...
You would think, but none of their emergencies have records. They have a record of what they are.
Well, now, then they're all challengeable, aren't they?
Yes. But who wants to fight every single time they have an emergency, right? That's like this, for instance, this what we're talking about, the mayor not being able to vote. We have an absolute legal challenge, and that's done. I mean, we can win that. That's very clear cut on what that is. But it cost us between $3,000 and $3,500 to go and challenge that in court. Okay? How long do we want to challenge this in court? That's really where we're at today. At Southside, we're incorporating up there right now. That's what looks like the folks are going to put this through. It's not that the people out there really want to incorporate. They're wanting to build a legal wall around themselves to keep their aggressor that happens to be just north of the river from coming down and having aggressive action. And so it ends up being good in the long run. It's just a lot more work because what we're going to do up there is we're talking about actually writing a constitution and codifying the freedoms that we hold dear up there. Well, we'll put them in the code in the Constitution and use that Constitution to clip our city government's wing. In order that because the Constitution is different than an ordinance. An ordinance is how a city controls its people. A Constitution is how its people controls its government.
Yeah.
And we're going to control the government in such a way that we can continue to enjoy the freedoms that we have.
Because you really don't want a government.
We really don't want one.
Yeah.
No, I mean, a government by nature grows larger, right? How can we take how can we take our government and put it in such a box that it does not step on the freedoms that we hold dear?
Well, now, the United States tried to do that, didn't they?
And in my opinion, with a few statements, they could have built a much better box. And we hope to learn from that.
Now, Brandon, the United States Constitution is more holy than Scripture. It's perfect. It's flawless.
you know, here's what we have. If we took the Constitution and actually took it with the writings that its authors put with it, we would derive an incredible document that literally we would be inside of what they're looking for.
You're talking the Federalist Papers.
Yes. But that's not what we've done. We've said that all of a sudden the Constitution is done, it takes a life of its own outside of what any of the authors intended, and now we could bend it to be whatever.
Well, it's an evolving, growing, living, breathing document.
I think that's right through the amendment process.
I agree with you completely. But you know, that amendment process was purposely made very difficult.
Yeah. And, you know, I've given a very stern warning to the folks out at Southside. There's certain things that they need to do, that they need to hold as absolutely dear. We're going to codify them, but they need to absolutely hold as dear. We intend on having a mayor and a council, for instance, that are not paid. Period. Nothing. They'll be reimbursed for actual expenses. Turn in your receipts, you will get your expenses reimbursed. Other than that, there's nothing. I've told them out there that a full-time mayor is full-time trouble. And we've got to stay away from that at all costs. Why in the world would I pay a man to spend his time figuring out how he can encumber my life? I don't want that. We're not looking for greater services or anything else. We're happy. So we don't need that. We need to have laws in place that protect property owners' rights very strongly. Because at the very root of a lot of our issues today is we've actually formed in our country today, a lot of times, disdain for property owners. We actually do everything we can to step on their rights. Well, that a person's property is an extension of themselves. And the use of that property is an extension of their very free speech, and the way that they would use that property is an extension of themselves. So it's actually like poking your finger in someone's eye when I go against the use of their property.
So let me see if I can envision a city council meeting. The mayor calls the city council meeting to order and he says, "Is there any business before the city council meeting?" And they say, "No, we can't think of any." Is there a motion to adjourn?
It's nearly like that, yes. As a matter of fact, when they do have business, we want to empower a city council to be able to do the day-to-day runnings of what the people have empowered them to do, no more. Any decision that would require them to do more, that we need to bring to the people to do it. And that bar needs to be set high enough that, guess what, if it's hard enough to do, they're not going to be bringing things before the people because the bar is too high.
You know, one thing you ought to put in your Constitution is any vote of the people has to take place at a general election rather than a special election.
I tell you what, I personally am hoping for, it may not happen, these are just things that I'm hoping for at this point. I would like to see us actually have a type of a town election that's just for the town, that the town can draw together. For instance, let's say we had a town election where the mayor's running, city council's running, whatever. Let's make a big celebration out of that. Let's come together, let's have speeches, let's talk, let's have a debate, let's come together as a town and cast our votes. And make something, but how can we use this process to pull everybody together? People have there's going to be a little bit of money that we do get to be able to run the town, but we've been asked, how are you going to pay for little bitty things that happen, what have you? Well, you know, governments can be funded without taxes. I said, well, good grief about it. Look at Valonia. Valonia around there, they have a huge yard sale every year that they do. People come from other states even to come to this thing. Why can we not do that as a community? Draw people, draw commerce into the area. We make a big town event out of it. People come in. It's good for the whole area, and we use the proceeds to help fund our town. To build a little park or to do something over here where we're not actually taxing people to do it. And that type of thing, that's more on the scale of what we need to be doing. We don't need to be floating bonds and raising taxes. We need to be coming together as a community to do the things that we can do as a community.
You know, one thing I don't think government has realized is when you sell bonds, the money you raise goes to pay interest rather than to do what you really want to do. For example, on this project, I think half of what will be collected and paid will be interest.
Sure. Bankers are very happy about it.
I'm sure they are.
So it sounds like a mortgage.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, it is a mortgage. I mean,
That's correct.
yeah.
You know, and so, I mean, we don't want to overextend ourselves. We're not looking for more things. We don't want the government to do more. We want the government to be able to protect our freedom if it's going to do anything, period. And so, that's really the thing out there.
You guys got any other comments on
On Southside?
Yeah.
Oh, let me think. Yeah, the only thing I can say is the whole process of this recreational center was offensive to most people. You know, it was, we want this, and they went into the schools to deal with families with young children, and they said, this is for you and your kids. And so then they denied the vote to the people. You know, most of the people that shop in Batesville don't live in Batesville.
Sure.
Because the population of the county is much larger.
37,000.
Yeah, and the population of the city is only 9,000. So the main group of people that are to pay for this are denied a vote on it.
Yeah, 2/3.
And that just didn't seem right. And it was offensive. Even if it was legal, it was offensive.
But even that, if I recall correctly, it was voted down the first time. I believe they came back for a second vote on it.
I don't remember that. Is that so?
Right. Yeah, I think that's right.
That may be true.
And so from that, what kind of audacity does a politician have when it's voted down to immediately come back and say, I'm just going to make another run at it? Right? I mean, that's audacity. Because as a matter of fact, that reminds me of an attack. If I'm attacking a city and I don't get it, I back up, I regroup, and I attack it again. We shouldn't live in a society where we attack our own people. I mean, as a matter of fact, we've left civil society at that point, have we not?
You know what? I think our politicians should be Christ-like. And what did Jesus say? He said, behold, I stand at the door and knock. If you open the door, I'll come in and have supper with you. Isn't that what he said? Well, what do the politicians of Batesville say? Behold, I'm going to kick in your door. I mean, that's basically what's going on.
Well, I want to say this very clearly so everyone understands. The way that this has been handled by the leadership over here in Batesville is terrible. Okay, it's been handled terribly. But make no mistake, if the city of Batesville had come very nicely, the people out there still would not want to be part of Batesville. It's not just a matter of the way it was done. The people in Batesville, the populace, the folks here, should be very offended that their representatives would act so reprehensibly as the way they've done this. They should be offended by it. At my company, if somebody that worked in my company went and treated one of my customers so poorly, one of my vendors so poorly, that person would no longer represent my company. They would not be bearing my company's name. The leadership in Batesville bears the name of the populace of Batesville, and people need to really think about the representation of who's doing it. But the people in Southside, even if it was done nicely, they don't want to be part of Batesville.
That's why they live in Southside.
Sure. They don't have anything against the people of Batesville. It's just not the way they choose to live.
You know, I've noticed that some of the other radio stations that I've listened to run PSAs, you know, public service announcements, especially in the state of Arkansas, trumpeting the benefits of living in a city. And I kind of scratched my head and I thought, yeah, I mean, I guess there might be some more services and things for some people if they're interested in, you know, whatever. They don't want a well, you know, they want city water or whatever. I began to think about that, and I began to think about Agenda 21. I began to think about some other things that have to do with controlling populations and all that. I just kind of put it all on the back burner. But, you know, I really think that some of these issues are a lot bigger. And I don't know that our local government is in leagues with the Agenda 21 and with all that. And that's part of it. I think it's maybe not as diabolical as that. I think it's just, hey, we ran out of money. We got to come up with a solution. So let's take over this other group, you know, and try to raise our tax revenue. Which I heard is denied. No, that's not why we're doing this. You know?
Yeah, they do deny that.
But well, I mean, why else would you do it? We just all want to be one big happy family, or you know, we want to provide more services. Well, I mean, what services are they going to provide? They've got a sewer, they've got police through the Independence County Sheriff's Department, they've got their own fire protection.
Matter of fact,
most of the policemen live up where we're at.